Dirk. Born and raised in the western Colorado desert, Dirk Petersen spent most of his childhood on his parents' hobby farm, where he discovered that the work nonetheless was real enough. After these halcyon days of manure patrol, fence mending, and irrigation, he found himself in the upper Midwest wearing heavy coats and translating ancient Greek. Now in hot pursuit of an MFA, he lives in San Francisco with a herd of musical instruments and enjoys video conferences with his partner and technophobic guinea pigs. He promises to tell you stories that are not about mules and donkeys someday. Everyone, please welcome Dirk.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. I sort of wrote it, I guess. You said it so well.
Oh my God.
It certainly is an honor to be invited to be one of the two keynote speakers for this winter's session of the Pacific Regional Numismatic Society. As I'm sure most of you are aware, 2014 was a very, very important year for the study of ancient coinage. And I'm very excited to present some summaries of the latest findings. I'm so sorry. Okay.
I'm just kidding. That was silly.
Okay, so this is a piece about mules. Right? And it's sort of about mules. And yeah, okay, here we go. Most people who live in the United States are familiar with horses. The horse occupies a special place in the national imagination, reaching its apotheosis in the twin pillars of bluegrass country horse racing in the Wild West. Seabiscuit, Trigger, Man o' War, and Hi-Ho Silver. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show and the manicured spectacles that let the sweating colonizers in the crowd pretend they won it fair and square. The rodeo circuit and that high and lonesome sound. And car after car, Mustang, Bronco, Pinto, and Colt. These last two are especially nice. And you want the best bud money can buy? You better believe it comes thundering in behind a team of Clydesdales, their dinner plate-sized hooves strumming the ground in time to the jangle of their traces. But another equine makes its way through this nation. Little known to many, but adored with singular devotion by those few who swear by no other steed. This animal is the mule. These long years came power walking into my life one winter day, and as they say, things ain't quite been the same since. That muley winter day, however, was not my first brush with equestrian dreaming. Long before the first copy of Mules and More magazine had entered the equine-free in-town house of my early childhood, I'd fallen hard for the high romance of the noble cowboy. I was not content, though, to let this fixation be constrained to the open range of my voracious imagination. No way. I was going to bring it out for the world to see. Step one, the boots. They appeared one day in a closet or a corner of a room, bright red and just my size. Put those on and there was no trail I couldn't gallop through, no errant cow I couldn't track down. The jeans were easy, because this was America, but the belt was a talisman. On the tarnished brass buckle, a cowboy clung to a flailing bronc, one hand trailing in the air and his hat making a dramatic exit. Cinched my trousers with that belt, and I could feel the dauntless brass cowboy's riding skill course right through me. The shirt, snap front, double-breasted, number in navy blue, just like the cavalry or John Wayne used to wear. Tied loose around the neck, ready to be drawn over the nose and mouth in the event of a high desert dust storm. A bright red bandana to match those buckaroo boots. And lastly, a tight woven straw hat with a high, narrow crown, cinched under the chin with a stampede string, just to make sure I wouldn't lose it like the cowboy on the buckle. So there I was, dressed for action. And what was the action? Trip to the mall with my mom to do some errands, dinner out with the family at a restaurant. One time in the food court, a kid, maybe a year younger than me at the time, jumped up, eyes wide, and shouted, "Look at the cowboy, Mommy!" I whirled around, hoping to catch a glimpse of just such a hero. Then I realized, the kid thought I was the cowboy, all 4 or 5 years worth of me. Wow, I thought, guess my costume's really good. And then, I'm not really a cowboy. Caught up in the embarrassment of my success, I soon abandoned the practice. Now before I write my masquerade off as entirely cringeworthy, just imagine that you grew up in a place where a slice of the population really did wear cowboy boots, snap front shirts, big belt buckles, and cowboy hats. A place that was on the big league pro rodeo circuit. A place where ranchers still ran cattle all over the mountains and still rounded them up with horses, as often as ATVs. Then you can imagine my excitement at the prospect of equine in my 7 or 8-year-old life. Horses, at last! I could finally live down what I had begun to consider the shame of being a huge poser as a younger kid. because that would be the real deal. No, not horses, son, my dad said. Mules. What? Why? Well, because they're smarter, more sure-footed, and just better. And to prove it, my parents produced a low-budget VHS checked out from the Mesa County Public Library that explained how mules are the only mount sure-footed enough and trustworthy enough to carry tennis shoe-clad, white-knuckled Easterners up and down the narrow trails that lead to the floor of the Grand Canyon. I saw a lot of that video in the next few weeks and never found it entirely convincing, but my credulity was a moot point. The deal was sealed. We were to become mule people. Now, the first thing you need if you want to become a mule person, aside from a VHS about mule tourism and a few issues of Mule and More, is, of course, a mule. In many communities in the U.S., interested persons can find staples where they can rent time using a horse, whether to take lessons, ride in the arena, or even hit the trails for a little slice of adventure. For whatever reason, mules are in far shorter supply at these fine facilities, leaving most would-be mule riders with two options. The first is to find a friend who has a mule that she or he is willing to lend out for the occasional amble. As to the likelihood of succeeding in this endeavor, consider your surrounding geography. Are you in the Ozarks? If not, refer to the aforementioned mule scarcity. In most cases, then, the budding enthusiast is left but one option: buying a mule. But if you're like my family, the complications don't stop there. I spent the first 8 years of my life living in town, in a comfortable split-level house. While this property did have a kennel for the safe storage of our canine companions, the yard had no suitable enclosure for equine. After all, you can't have mules just the other side of your walkout basement's sliding glass door. So the only option was to find a boarding facility. Now, fortunately for us, boarding facilities abound in horsey pickup truck to cowboy hat in western Colorado. My parents already had one picked out. Several months before the first livestock acquisition, my mom had begun to indulge in the equestrian dream by finding a place to take riding lessons. Although there are no mules in sight or earshot at Reimer's Rainbow Ranch, she nonetheless began cutting her chops on lesson horse extraordinaire, DT. But the problem with a great lesson horse is everyone else always wants to be taking lessons on it. And anyway, DT was no mule. That led my parents to cast their eye roving over the valley in search of a suitable steed. Now, horsey though western Colorado is, mules do periodically float up and break the surface, swelling the ranks of some herd or another. One of these vaguely mulish warm spots was the facility of Scott Lowry, a horse trader in the rural hinterlands who happened to wheel and deal long ears once in a while. Like all good horse traders, Lowry had a couple pickups and a couple different horse trailers on the premises, along with various sizes and shapes of pins cobbled together from prefab panels and baling twine. A glad-handing jovial gent with a firmly ensconced cowboy hat and a lanky comportment, Lowry was the source for Red, my family's first mule. And what a first mule Red was. Sorrel, a bit sway-backed, and an easy keeper who could sprout a gut overnight, with a massive head and a bony hump on his snout that looked like the bars of a go-kart. Red was the most profoundly difficult animal to catch that I've ever met. Conveniently, he was also one of the first I've ever had to catch or seen caught. So all my subsequent catching experiences have seemed thoroughly expedient. Indeed, for my mom, for whom Red was best behaved, she'd often have to spend 15 minutes catching him in a 12 by 20 run. It's not that big. Even though we got him on Valentine's Day, no one was ever going to say he was beautiful, although I always did think he was handsome in his way, which could have been a view that not even my mom shared. Something about that huge head that I imagine weighed as much as my 8-year-old self. And with its heavy brow and the way the skin sank so deeply behind the prominent arch of the bone above his eye. I liked to run my finger lightly over that depression, fascinated by the hollowness beneath the skin, as though there was some piece missing. And once my parents pointed it out, I grew to appreciate the heft of his leg bones, which surpassed that of just about any of the horses at Rainbow Ranch. If he were a rig, he would have been a diesel for sure. But a turbo diesel, because he could walk with at least as much piss and vinegar as the gray-haired lady who, in her fingerless gloves, jog-trotted up and down the street past our house every day. Indeed, when Red hit the trail, he often seemed to have but one objective: get out and back as fast as possible. Which could have been because food always waited on the other side. I'm not sure though. As we walked into the grounds of Rainbow Ranch, horse owners would whip their heads around and stare, wide eyes and open mouths belying the alarm in their gazes. Then they would turn to their horses with worry widening their eyes before wheeling back around to watch our progress. What run is he going to be occupying? Please, say it's not the one next to my dear Guggenheim's Lucky Munificence lollipop. Periodically, his hee-haw would tear through the grounds, and legging-clad dressage riders would fall weeping to the wood chips. The party was over, mule people. The mules had arrived. So that was Red. Piss, vinegar, and a big head, and a bigger appetite. But the thing with mules is that, like potato chips, electric guitars, or Ferraris, you can't stop at just one. And once we'd reeled Red in, we'd pretty well exhausted the best the Grand Valley could offer in the hybrid department. No option was left but a journey to the beating heart, or at least the musty rye zone, the Ozarks. Lest you think my parents rash, though, we didn't all just pile into the wagon and ship out for the nebulous interstices in Missouri and Arkansas in one fell swoop. Instead, the preliminary expedition was carried out by my dad alone. He, no doubt a few cowboy hats and at least one pair of Ariat boots, hopped in his still pretty new Cadillac and put the pedal to the metal, which is no hyperbolic figure of speech in this case, burning down I-70 for the Arkansas-Kansas border in a little town called Baxter Springs. Destination? A rendezvous with Thomas Jones, Tommy Yergin, and a little event in Joplin, Missouri, the Mule Rodeo. Not sure how the conversations transpired that led to the first set of encounters, but I can imagine how weirdly wonderful it was. Rockville, Maryland-raised surgeon from western Colorado, a place got pinned and wriggling somewhere between 1886 and 1995, which most often seems to average out to about 1973, grabs the phone and dials up Ozark-born and raised welder, raccoon hunter, and mule person Thomas Jones and says, "I saw your info on mules and more, and I'd love to come see what you've got." Thomas says, "I may not have everything you need, but I bet Tommy Yergin might. Why don't you come on down and we'll show you around." Dates were set and the rubber hit the pavement. I don't remember too many of the details of my dad's first trip. I have no doubt he described Tommy Yergin as a real character, and probably said the same of Thomas, although less emphatically. He might have described their physical presences, perhaps their body habitus. Tommy was a wiry, lean, salty old guy in overalls, always overalls. Thomas Jones was a little more robust, a little more mulleted, and a lot younger. Without a doubt, he regaled my mom with tales of every meal he ate during his absence. But the only storyline that's really stuck with me was that of the Mule Rodeo. What feats of agility, what dazzling displays of equine exploits. Because while a Mule Rodeo contains, alas, the same cruel bullshit that usually comes packaged under the name, the calf roping and hog tying of the PRCA, the Mule Rodeo is simultaneously something much more like the great athletic events of Olympia, Delphine, Nemea, or Isthmia. Perhaps I exaggerate, but if you had heard the account firsthand from the dazzled lips of my dad, seen the amusement in his eyes and been caught up in the contagion of his admiration, you could never question such illustrious illusion. A mule, just a little mule, barely more than 14 hands tall, clearing a 6-foot-tall barrier in a single leap. Was it a running jump? Pfft, no way. The human walked that mule right up to the barrier till it was nose to rail, clicked or whistled, and wham! The mule crouched, leaned back, and was over that top before you had time to finish putting that next handful of kettle corn in your open mouth. I can imagine him shouting his enthusiasm, while Tommy cackled and Thomas smiled quietly, arrayed on the breezers either side. He must have been certain his little trick would make a believer out of anyone. It wasn't just a standing jump we heard about. The rodeo was full of feats of agility and trick riding. That standing jump was what served to further seal the deal for our muley future. A horse could never do that. My dad was right. Those folks in Joplin sure knew how to make their mules shine. But the purpose was mule acquisition after all, so my dad's time was mostly spent eyeing the eligible long ears. When he arrived at Thomas Jones's place, my dad met Joe, a bay John mule, which is a male mule, taller and less robust than Red, with big liquid brown eyes and the softest, finest hair on his nose. Thomas Jones' son, Tommy, who was a couple of years or so older than I, had been riding him around, so Thomas vouched he was tractable and stable for all ages. However, Thomas didn't have any stock on hand to fit the bill for my mom, so they headed on over to Tommy's place, which was located just outside Jane, Missouri, a speck of a town in the southwesternmost corner of the state. And that is where my dad met his girlfriend. Oh, those eyelashes. Such long, thick eyelashes, surrounding those big, light brown eyes, which would regard you from beneath the lashy flutter. Flaxen hair of such luster as Yeats could only dream, vying in splendor with the sun itself. And those ankles, their fine, slim bones, the delicacy that gave on to the small, shapely feet. And, oh, the way she would stamp and snort and fart and swish her tail, impatient to go, 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 wherever you wanted. The farther the better, the faster the better. Babe. And a babe she was. Just put 500 miles on her, Doc, and she'll be perfect for your wife, Tommy whistled. And he was totally wrong. Just crooked enough to probably know he was totally wrong. And my dad may have known he was wrong too, but none of that mattered. He was in love. Alas, although I have no doubt my dad would welcome Babe into that Cadillac, in which his children were only mostly welcome. His large format lover was not passenger seat material, so it was arranged that Thomas would drive the two new family members to a point roughly halfway where we would meet him for a swap. On the drive over, my mom, who was a western Colorado lifer, began to feel anxious and unmoored by the horizon, which, devoid of mountains, mesas, or monoliths, extended on every side to its vanishing point. Thinking, as I often did, that I should do, think, or feel whatever my mom did, I gazed around and tried to feel freaked out. However, this game quickly became less interesting than whatever books I had on the trip. Probably Hank the Cowdog or Billy and Blaze, but the Hardy Boys was always a safe bet. Cowboys, dogs, horses, and sleuthing, because no one had yet written any good mule-themed youth mysteries. Anyway, I still haven't gotten over those red cowboy boots and the feeling of bandana sticking to my face. I just hope some cowboy somewhere rode a mule. My dad, however, was in his element. In his infomercial-approved blues blockers driving glasses, firmly ensconced, hands loosely wrapped around the steering wheel, gazing at the expanse of plains that reminded him of Nebraska summers on his granddad's farm. None of us could have understood his excitement then, but I have no doubt he had flaxen hair on his mind. We met Thomas Jones in a motel parking lot next to a service station, a place where he and my dad could find enough room for their rigs. As we walked up to Thomas's rig, the thud of stamping hooves made the outside shudder, and I felt my insides twist. The trailer held big, powerful animals with rock-hard hooves and hot breath. My books and belt buckle weren't going to help me there. The mules were unloaded and paraded about the parking lot, where I witnessed at least one torrential urination. And there was my dad singing Babe's praises, and here came Joe. Well, my dad turned and said something like, "And here's your mule, son." I gazed up. Joe was at least twice as tall as I'd imagined. But he's supposed to be a kid's mule, I thought. Watching him swish his tail and stomp a bit, his widened nostrils and lifted head, testing the sights and sounds of this new place. There he was, though, and I knew I'd be sitting astride him soon enough, because I was nothing if not an obedient child. All right, that's all for now. Thanks so much.